people who don't fit those bills. You know, there's transgender, there's cisgendered, and then there's non-binary people, queer people as well, who don't subscribe to either gender. They're not quite guys, they're not quite girls, so they just, you know, do their own thing. And, or if they're a little bit guy, they're a little bit girl as well. And that actually crosses over into, if you see I put a little star up there next to trans, that's, transgender is kind of an umbrella term for all of that. And so that's why we put the little star next to it. So that kind of actually being non-binary can overlap with being transgender and everything. So that's, did that help?
Yeah. Okay. What was that term? What is that?
Cisgender?
Cisgender.
Cisgender.
It means you match up, like if you're a dick, like you look
Oh, if you're
It's attached to it.
yeah.
Not just on the shelf.
The term that I tend to use in class is gender consistent.
There you go.
Gender congruent,
Right.
as opposed to gender incongruent or transgender. And we think about like sex, male, female. Gender, masculine, feminine. Because just because you have a penis doesn't know that you know how to walk like a man, talk like a man, right? We learn about those things. Like my son right now, you can see he'll walk around and go, right? He's learning how to be a boy, right? But then he also has his vacuum cleaner and all his other stuff as well. Because daddy vacuums as well, right? We're not gender consistent in our household. So we cross over gender lines in terms of how my wife and I act. That's just who we are. So for me, and I don't like the term straight either. So thinking about labels, I prefer the term flaming heterosexual. That's just the way that I feel about it.
Flaming heterosexual?
Flaming heterosexual.
I use that all the time.
You know, I knew I was hetero when my mom walked in and I was on the toilet. I was 2 years old. First time she ever saw me on the toilet of my own free will. And I was sitting there reading Playboy magazine upside down.
You don't need to
Well.
This idea of binary, if y'all don't mind me speaking this a little bit, you know, we live in this world of this Western society is about night, day, black, white, male, female. Everything's cut. You know, Republican, Democrat. You know, like that's all that exists. There's such a wide array of things going out there. You know, there's gray area. Right? There are people who are born who are not just male, not just female. There's some wonderful mixture, but we as a society force them into a box, usually before they're old enough to even know anything about it. Think about President Obama. We talk about him as the first black president. He is not the first black president. He's a mixed race. Right? But we label him, because he has dark skin, we label him a black man. You know, so and it kind of goes back to that one drop rule as well.
So I was in my Western literature class, and he asked us to give a representation of Western culture. And I feel, you know, I gave out my opinion that there's a person on the left yelling at a person on the right, and there's a bunch of people in the middle not knowing whether to run to the left or the right or just stay where they are. And, you know, that's how I feel about how everything is nowadays, because people are just confused, and, you know, it feels like it's a transition period, but, you know, I feel like eventually we'll get there where it's a lot easier to pick your role when you know that's right and move on from there.
Even if it's not.
Even if it's not on the left or the right, you might want to stay in the, you know, mid-left.
You might be up.
You might be up, down. See, I just hope for that one day.
2 degrees to the west.
One thing I didn't mention was I know a girl who, she was seeing a therapist when she was 18, and he asked her, you know, she said she was bisexual, and he asked her if she'd ever been with a woman, and she said, yes, when I was 16. And he said, so you've been bisexual for 2 years now. And that was just odd to me. I mean, to speak of it like that, like obviously she's been bisexual her whole life. It was just an odd. Like I said, bisexual people's, their orientation are not defined by other people.
So, do you think that it's harder for you to find like a man or a woman that would identify as either gay or lesbian? Is it hard for you to find someone that would accept you for being bisexual, even if you, like if you were to find a heterosexual man, is it harder to find someone that's approving of a bisexual?
For me personally, no, but I do know, I I have bisexual female friends who are with people who have always been with heterosexual men that have told them, you can't say you're bisexual anymore now that we're dating because you're with me. My boyfriends have always been incredibly accepting of it. It's not something that is ever a problem. To find a lesbian girlfriend can be difficult because of the idea that bisexual women, there's this stigma that, thank you.
Thank you.
There's this stigma that that if you're a lesbian girl and you date a bisexual girl, she will leave you for a man because she really just wants to experiment. That can be really difficult.
Well, and with me, it's a little bit harder because it usually this goes back to promiscuity. The argument on both sides is, oh, you're bisexual. That means you have twice the chance to cheat on me. What? If I'm not going to cheat on you when I'm straight, then I'm not going to cheat on you if I'm bi. That's just how it is. That is completely that is a choice that someone makes. That is not linked to how they identify sexually. And a lot of the time it's harder for me to find guys. Like I've dated one guy, like she's dated one girl. And a lot of that is my preference in males. It's just high school.
Are you picky?
I am.
That's good. That is good.
But
You're lonely for a while that way, though. So.
Better be lonely when with
that's cool.
somebody that's an asshole. I mean,
Did it wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, to give a backstory on that, it just kind of turns out that in high school and middle school and whatever, most people who, especially if they're gay or something, are finding anything, are finding their identity, so they tend to fit really well into all the stereotypes of the identity they're trying to fit in, and stereotypes just aren't really my thing in any part of life, including sexuality, so that's just not really my thing. And, so some of that's my choice, but some of it is also just unacceptance. And then females, it is easier. I mean, I have a girlfriend right now. She's cool with me being bisexual. I wouldn't date someone who wasn't cool with me being bisexual. Like, that wouldn't make sense, I guess.
They're not
So,
accepting who you are.
yeah. So, yeah, it can be harder, I would say. Yeah. Though sometimes it's easier if you've only dated one guy, just because, because women or girls think that maybe you're straight. I don't know. It's confusing.
Was the guy you were with very accepting of your bisexuality?
Yeah, he was gay.
I
Yeah.
would think so.
Why?
Well, no, yeah, he was like, okay, he was sorry.
We're experimenting, or
He could've been
asexual.
I was meaning whether he was bi or gay. I was
Yeah, he was
asking-
gay and he was cool.
He was gay. He was gay. Okay.
He was gay and he was cool.
Gonna make a song.
See you guys next week.
Okay.
What else do we have?
More questions?
Anything else?
So does it hurt the bisexual community whenever you have people that first come out as bisexual and then end up being lesbian or gay?
It only hurts the community if you start saying that that's how all bisexual people are, that they will eventually come out. It does hurt the community when you take someone who says, I used to be bisexual, but now I'm, and you apply that to everyone, that's a big thing. You'll have people who aren't bisexual saying, well, I knew somebody who used to be bisexual, but now they're, that phrase is, thank you guys.
That sounds like they used to do meth, but they're in recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you're getting over it or something.
I mean, being in the gay community, whenever you meet someone that's bisexual, I mean, I'll be honest, I never really thought much to what I was saying, but I would always just say, well, just give them a month or two, and they're going to be gay. But now that I've actually, I guess, having experience with people that are actually bisexual kind of makes me think more about saying things like that.
Well, it kind of happens because we live in such a heteronormative society that because people are always taught, they're always raised that, okay, you're probably going to be heterosexual. That's what people are taught most of the time. That when they start redefining their sexuality and they start discovering who they really are, once they're in that experimental stage, they'll just label themselves as bisexual because it's like, what am I? I don't know yet because I'm experimenting, so this is the thing that's closest to what I'm doing right at this moment. So that's why quite a few people who are in their experimental stage count themselves as bisexual. So yeah, that's why that usually occurs, at least from what I've seen.
In our society, we are not allowed to be fluid with our sexuality. We are told that we need to fit into every label, which is why you hear so many people saying, oh, I used to be this, instead of just saying, instead of just being like, well, I'm fluid. I have varying degrees of liking certain genders, and I mean, that's the thing. You do not have to know who you are. You're allowed to be confused if you're bisexual. That doesn't mean that all bisexuals are confused, but you are allowed to be confused if you're bisexual. Everyone's allowed to be confused about their sexuality. It's confusing. I guess that's why they have the term bi-curious for people who don't really know what's going on yet and stuff. But I was never bi-curious. When I found out what bi was, I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I am. Because I was one of those people who didn't know that it existed until I was already in middle school, and I found out my favorite singer was bisexual, and I was
Billy Armstrong.
Yeah.
Just saying that.
Billy Armstrong. I was actually really disappointed because I grew up really in a very what's that word? Homophobic. Sorry, I should have forgot that word for a second. I grew up in a really homophobic society, family, and so I was actually really disappointed when I found that out until I was like, oh wait, no, that's what I am. So.
And just thinking about the complicated sexuality, well, here's how our society tends to think about sexuality, is you got homosexual and you got heterosexual. And then you start learning about bisexuality, and you connect these dots, there's bisexuality. But then you start realizing that it's all fluid. You just got a whole bunch of crazy lines, it turns into a sphere. So there's no real representative diagram for it. And a lot of people will say that they're somewhere on this original line, like if that's homosexuality, that's heterosexuality, I would probably
Like as far as like attraction, like more attracted to men, less attracted to women.
Yeah, yeah.
That's another thing. If you're bisexual, you are allowed to be more attracted to one side of the spectrum than you are the other one.
Doesn't mean you can't be attracted to
If you're gay or if you're straight, you're allowed to be a little bit, attracted to another side of the spectrum. That's okay too. And you don't even have to, thank you guys, you don't even have to identify as bisexual if you are. See, with the whole pansexuality and bisexuality thing, I considered for a little bit just telling people I was pansexual instead of bisexual, but the bisexual community is really important to me. It's a really loving community that I found, and I feel like being bisexual is a part of who I am. So I was actually really relieved when I found out that the definition could be the entire spectrum, not just the binary. So, I mean, if your label is important to you, you don't have to label yourself as something else just because you think guys are cute or you think girls are hot,
Well, yeah, I've known quite a few people who label themselves as heterosexual or homosexual who are in a heterosexual or homosexual relationship that does not define how they define themselves, but it's because they found that one if they're heterosexual, it's because they found that one person of the same sex who they could love and they could have a sexual or a non-sexual relationship with and be happy. I've known quite a few people like that on both homosexual and heterosexual. They still define themselves as homosexual or heterosexual, it's just they found that one person.
Audrey is our president, and she identifies as a straight female, but she's more kind of like an above-the-waist straight female. Let's be honest.
No, come on. What the hell? What do you mean?
Above the waist.
You gotta explain these things.
This is,
I mean, She's told me.
You can't open
can't
the
do
door
that.
and then not.
Do that, Evelyn.
She's straight, but boobs are awesome. In other words.
Well, okay.
That's
That was really
Fact.
specific.
yeah.
That's not.
Yes.
That's like booty bar.
Water is wet.
Water is wet.
Boobs are awesome no matter
You could say
which
you're
part of the spectrum
inflating-
you're on.
You're inflating heterosexual. She's more like
She's just heterosexual.
like a sparking heterosexual.
Smoldering.
Smoldering.
God.
Flaming is so much better.
Question. Like, how does the bisexual community feel about people who say they're bi-curious?
That's totally fine. I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of time on bisexual community Tumblr, and a lot of people will message them saying, I've been having these feelings, I feel like I'm a little curious. And a lot of the bi people I know are actually very good with advice on that. And it's actually, if you are bi-curious, I encourage you to go to a bi person and ask them questions. And
Not if they've had a threesome.
yeah, not if they've had a threesome.
Yeah, that's the equivalent of asking somebody who's same-sex oriented, are you a top or a bottom? Don't ask that.
Don't ask that either.
Don't ask that to a straight person either. I
See,
mean,
I knew not to ask if they've been in a threesome. I didn't know not to ask top or
Don't
bottom.
ask if they're a top
Sorry,
or bottom.
whoever I
That's
offended
Don't
earlier.
ask about sex life.
It's just a good idea not to ask about sex
Is it the
life.
apple or the
Either
vampire?
the person's gonna get offended, or you're gonna get really offended by
The answer.
what they're doing.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna ask, expect an honest answer, and you may not want that.
My
But
mom has that policy.
back to your question. Basically, I'm not going to speak for the whole community because you asked about the whole community. Because just like in any community, there are douchebags and assholes who are going to be like, oh, you're bi-curious, well then you're not part of our group, so get the hell out. So that happens a lot. That happens sometimes. But with the majority of people I know who are bisexual, including myself, it's just okay. Come to me. Okay, if you're curious, then yeah, I'll help you understand what's happening. It's usually accepting. Though again, there are those angry militant people.
And then there are the younger people who are still figuring out their sexuality for themselves, and they tend to not understand as much either. But I mean, I've had a lot of bi-curious friends who ended up being gay or being straight, and I think it's anybody questioning their sexuality is a healthy, good thing, and everybody should encourage that. Because like the manifesto said, nothing should be assumed about sexuality, including your own.
There you go.
So, I guess, anyone else? Last call? Questions, comments? Okay, well, like I said, our next meeting is February 15th, and it's sex education. There will be a lot of more.
It's different from most of our other meetings because we have, it's not just like talking or videos, there's games,